Hello, welcome back to Beyond the Box Score, episode 14. We're in the same attire, same environment. We're recording both episodes at the same time. So if anybody comes back and sees this and sees, it doesn't look any different, that is why. But we, on that last episode, talked a lot about recapping the weekend, what happened across sports this week, or for this episode of this week, we're talking rivalry week in college football. We're going to discuss some NBA stuff at the very end, some teams that have, piqued our interest, caught our eye, or are sneaky contenders. It's going to be heavily Eastern Conference. There's just a few Western teams I'm going to mention, but we're going to dive right in to rivalry week right here. The best time of year as well. It's during Thanksgiving, and it starts off with MACtion here. On this Tuesday, we're recording a couple MAC games. Fun fact, Akron's already done with their season. They played last week, and that was actually their last game. They played all year without a bye. So
that's kind of crazy.
The bye they did get, they then played on that Tuesday. So it wasn't even really a bye week. It was like a 3-day kind
of. It was like an extended rest, yeah.
Yeah, it's really weird. We have one game Thursday, Navy. Potentially in a do or die for them. They have to win to have a chance to get into the American Conference Championship game. They play at Memphis in a game they're probably going to lose. But then rivalry week truly gets started on this Friday. We have, as always on Friday, the Egg Bowl. A lot looming on this game because after this game, we will also get the conclusion or the determination of Lane Kiffin's status. Will he remain at Ole Miss? Will he take the reported $90 million offer from LSU? Or is he going to go to Florida? And there hasn't really been a lot of news regarding Lane Kiffin in Florida. So I do think this is Ole Miss or LSU. I think Lane Kiffin stays at Ole Miss, and he just uses this as a bunch of PR to hype up his relevance as a college football coach. But I think that game's going to loom large. We'll talk about Lane Kiffin temporarily in one moment. Just going down the slate, though, we have Georgia Tech on that Friday as well. We've got Indiana playing on that Friday against Purdue, in a rivalry that Purdue actually historically owns Indiana in. Random fun fact. A&M at Texas, that it will be a must-win for Texas if they want to have a shot at the college football playoff, something we both think they should not have a chance at all. Arizona State is playing Arizona. That'll be a good Big 12 game. And then Saturday, where all the marbles are, Ohio State at Michigan. This game also right now, the line has continued to go down. It opened at 12.5 for Ohio State. It's now 9.5 live as I'm looking at it. The over-under at 44.5. Also, 85% chance, of snow, 3 to 4 inches. It'll wind down by kickoff, but that is very much on the edge there looming for Ohio State and Michigan, and that will, if that holds true, play very much in advantage of Michigan and their playing style. Miami has a game against Pitt. Pitt had a big win we'll talk about last week against Georgia Tech, and for Miami, this is just the final stamp for them to try to make their college football playoff case. There are some other games going on. Lenore Sellers reportedly going to sit out of this last game against Clemson. He may enter the portal. We'll have to double check that, but there's a chance South Carolina will lose that game to Clemson for that reason. Not a whole lot otherwise on Saturday. Oregon's got a game against Washington they'll have to take care of business in. Oklahoma, LSU, same thing. Vanderbilt, Tennessee. There's some interesting matchups. We'll have the dog water bowl of the week. Florida State and Florida. That what should be a pretty good rivalry, pretty big rivalry. It has not been in recent memory. The Iron Bowl at 7:30. Alabama and Auburn. 6.5-point favorites are the Crimson Tide, who do not play well in the Kalen DeBoer era against unranked teams, and Auburn has a chance to again play sleeper. So there's some fascinating matchups here for the most part. A lot of them, otherwise, it's like really hit or miss. There's really good rivalries, and then there's just some filler games, and then there's those rivalries where both teams are bad, and honestly, it's not going to mean anything. But we're going to start with the whole Ole Miss thing with Lane Kiffin and where you see that going, because obviously this is a big game. Ole Miss will need this game to solidify their college football playoff case, and this is a game they have tended to struggle in against Mississippi State, and they'll play this one on the road.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Ole Miss, first of all, I would also think that Lane Kiffin is going to stay. I mean, the more I've thought about it, like, what is the point of leaving, right? Like, you've already built something at Ole Miss. You have enough resources. Like, you have a national title contender there at a school that hasn't seen that level of success that you've brought there. Why would you not just continue that, right? I mean, if they would have beat Florida last year, they would have been in the playoffs. So, like, they've been, and they're going to be in this year. So, like, are you ever going to win the SEC? I think you've got a really good chance to. I mean, if you're really only, just barely behind teams like Georgia, like A&M, I know the SEC is stacked, but Ole Miss is going to have a chance to compete. So I think Florida's out of the question. Like you said, I think it's either LSU or stay. I mean, at the same time, though, how do you say no to $90 million? I mean, like, I know these coaches make absurd money, but like, dude, $90 million is, I mean, the number just keeps going up, and anytime one of these big time coaches goes around. So I honestly have no idea. I mean, because in one hand, I don't see how you say no to 90 million, but then in another hand, I'm like, well, why would you want to leave what you've built at Ole Miss? So I think it'd be interesting. That's even if the 90 million that was reported is accurate. So I would like to see Lane Kiffin stay. To be honest, I really do like what he's done at Ole Miss. I really do think he has something special there at Ole Miss. I mean, you saw what he did with a backup quarterback. Imagine what he could do, when he has a real starting quarterback. And maybe Trinidad Chambliss will be his starting quarterback. We'll really have no idea. But yeah, no, certainly a big week for all these rivals. As for Ole Miss, I feel like Ole Miss is in kind of a weird spot, right? Because you feel like you should be competing in the SEC championship, but then you're kind of uh, sitting there, just kind of wait to see what Georgia and A&M does. However, though, I mean, not playing in the conference championship, to be honest, I mean, I guess that could kind of be a um kind of a plus, right? You get to host a playoff game, all that revenue that comes into the school could be just that much bigger for the school. And that's why I said I think Texas Tech is in like the perfect spot because you get to play the 12 seed, you get to host a playoff at home. But yeah, playing at Mississippi State should be no issue for Ole Miss. But Egg Bowl rivalry wouldn't shock me if we see some upsets. I think not to really change the subject, but I think my favorite upset potential of the week would be I know we were talking a little bit before we started recording. Oregon Washington. Oregon's coming off that big win against USC, right? Dan Lanning got his guys up for that game. Um, was it after the Penn State game that Oregon lost to Indiana at home? Was that was the week after, wasn't it?
It was the week after, or 2 weeks after, so it was
Yeah.
around time. But yeah,
Yeah, no. My point is, right? You get up for the USC game. I know the Penn State game is a little different. You had to travel across the country. Penn State was ranked, I believe, number 2 at the time. So I mean, a little bit of a different circumstances, but you never know. It could be a flat spot, right? We know Washington's a much better home team than they are on the road. I mean, God, they lost to Wisconsin on the road. So if Oregon's not careful, I think they could kind of slip up here. I don't know if they would get knocked out of the playoff because they have a pretty strong resume as it is. They've got a couple of ranked wins. I don't know how much stock the committee will put into that loss against Indiana. Well, they did play pretty bad against that Indiana team. Um, but yeah, they've got those couple of ranked wins. So I think Oregon could be on some thin ice here.
my favorite upset in terms of potential for the week is definitely Georgia Tech and Georgia. This is a game I think Georgia Tech blew last year. Now it's going to be at a neutral site for whatever reason at Mercedes Benz, where Georgia's used to playing because of the SEC championship game. So I think this has a ton of potential, at least for Georgia Tech to cover. It is 14.5 in favor of Georgia, but I think Georgia Tech will find a way to maybe rebound off of the brutal loss last week to Pitt. And honestly, they played pretty well in the entire second half. It was a costly pick six, though, on the goal line that really flipped that game once Georgia Tech was finally able to get back into it. So I think for all the Lane Kiffin stuff, I think he'll stay at Ole Miss. I think he should stay at Ole Miss. However, going to LSU with its brand as well as $90 million is 100% tempting. Like, I would have a hard time saying no to that as well. And Lane
Mm-hmm.
Kiffin knows in the back of his head he probably brings a sizable portion of pretty relevant role players to LSU if he takes that job. But I just think the timing of it is all weird. Like, you're going to decide that after the Egg Bowl when you still have the college football playoff looming. You still have everything in terms of your goals for the year, like in sights. And if they don't lose to Georgia, they are in the SEC championship game. So I think that's a whole other aspect to it as well. If A&M loses, that could lead to a lot of different tie-breaking scenarios for Ole Miss, Alabama, Georgia, and Texas A&M. But overall, I think he's going to stay at Ole Miss. I think he should if he leaves. I think it's definitely a bad idea with the timing of it, especially, and because it would be off of this rivalry. Like he better win. Like Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin better win on Friday, or else there's going to be a lot of questions about how this was handled in terms of the PR and everything else regarding Lane Kiffin and LSU. But Ole Miss is more than likely going to be firmly in the college football playoff. I don't necessarily agree with Lane Kiffin getting potentially $90 million for never being in the playoff to this point, but despite that, he obviously is one of the top coaches in college football, and he's warranted a sizable amount of money. I just don't know if 90 million is the number I would give. We've seen that fail in the past with Jimbo Fisher and Brian Kelly and other names like that. So Georgia Tech piqued my interest. Obviously, we'll have to monitor the Ole Miss game because there's a good chance with all the news around it. How are players handling it? How are players focused? Are they focused? Are they going to be 100% committed, or do they think their head coach is 100% committed? All those questions are very much warranted. A&M has a big game on the road playing Texas. We had a quick conversation about this, and we pretty much agree, so we'll keep it short. But Texas should not be a playoff team, even if they win this game. They have 3 losses. We saw last year with Alabama, they did not get in, and I think that should hold true for Texas here.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to have a 3-loss team in the playoff, right? I mean, there's much more. This is where the argument comes in, between the best teams and the most deserving teams. So you kind of have to find that middle ground. Like, if Texas got in over a team like BYU, I mean, I think that would just be a completely flawed system. I don't really know how you could allow that to go down. But yeah, Texas, they haven't really been impressive this year. I'm like, that's okay, right? But they've got the 3 losses, right? You kept Bama out last year because of the 3 losses. You kept Ole Miss out because of the 3 losses. So if they found a way to get Texas, and I understand this would be a big win. You're handing A&M their first loss, you are at home, but I just I don't really see how a team like Texas with that resume gets in. I think that's just a completely flawed system.
And to your point about BYU, I think they should already be firmly in the top 12, or I guess top 10. You really want to be top 10 because you have 2 teams not in the top 12 who will be in the top 12 as automatic champions. So if you're 11 or 12, you're kicked out. Sorry. So for BYU, because they are 11, they have one thing they can do that would solidify not only themselves but also Texas Tech being in the playoff, and that's winning this week, beating Texas Tech in a rematch in the Big 12 championship game, and then you are the team that's in there. You're a team kicking somebody out. Currently, Alabama's 10. Does that kick Alabama out, or does that kick Notre Dame out? I'm a fan of leaving Notre Dame out. They have played a pretty soft schedule. They have dominated a lot of these soft teams. We talk about the ACC and how bad it is, but people don't even realize Notre Dame plays half of the ACC, and when they play half of the ACC, it's the bottom feeding teams. Like they've played 3 of the bottom 5 teams in the ACC this year. So I don't think we should reward Notre Dame because they lost 2 games by close margins to A&M early and Miami early, and Miami being behind Notre Dame makes that flawed because Miami's 2 losses are better, than people make them out to be. SMU might be in the ACC championship game. They lost to Louisville, who is still a very quality team. They're going to have a decent bowl game, and they only have 3 losses. So I would argue that that whole 10 to 13 range is pretty flawed right now. It needs some tweaking, but BYU can ensure themselves by being in the playoffs if they beat Texas Tech. Because unfortunately for them, if they lose and they do have 2 losses, they will. It'll be bye BYU. They will not be in, and that then begs the question for me with Utah, another team, pretty solid schedule, I would argue. I think they would warrant being in the playoff first before Texas or before Notre Dame and all of these other scenarios, but that's not going to happen more than likely because Utah won't be in that Big 12 championship game, it looks like. So that whole aspect of it that you mentioned with BYU and Utah and the Big 12 teams there, I do agree. I'll even throw Miami in there. I think they should be a little bit more deserving. If they beat what will likely be ranked team after these rankings later tonight in Pitt, and they add another ranked win, I think Miami should get credited for that. Obviously, they haven't won off style points most of this year, but Miami has done everything in their power to get to where they need to be. They won't be in the ACC championship game, but I think they're definitely warranted to have more discussion for that top 12 than what is currently being had for them. Obviously, we can't look past the possibility of Ohio State dropping to Michigan. They had lost the last 4 years to Michigan. The weather sounds like it's going to be in favor of Michigan for this game. But if the Wolverines win this game and they get a little bit of help, they're 18 right now. There's a chance, and they will move up over USC because they lost, and that's top 15 team. If Michigan is 16 or 17, they might even jump Georgia Tech because, and they will because of that loss. So that's two teams. Michigan will likely be team number 16 in the rankings. If they get a win here, the possibility looms of Michigan squeaking into the playoff. I think that is definitely a conversation to be had. And if they were to get into the playoffs, they offer up a challenge from the physical running the football style of play for some of these teams. I don't think that works against a team like Oklahoma, but it could definitely work against other teams that might struggle to be susceptible to the run. So I think Michigan's a outside looking in team. Unfortunately, BYU as of right now is an outside looking in team as well. But I agree on Oregon. This is a game they've struggled in the past. When Kalen DeBoer was at Washington, they had continuously beat Oregon. So I think this is a game the Ducks will have to take care of business in. I know LSU is down, but this could be a tricky game for Oklahoma as well. Luckily for them, they're at home here. And if they were to lose this game, they might fall out of the top 12 as well. Vanderbilt, if they want to have any chance at the playoff, they have to win this game against a should-be unranked Tennessee team. Tennessee won't, jump the rankings and get in if they win, but it would solidify their case for one being ranked and two being better than perceived with the way the season has gone. Other than that, it really does come down to the big rivalries that we have: the Egg Bowl, the Ohio State Michigan game, Alabama Auburn, and then other than that, Georgia Tech. I mean, those are the five trademark games to watch. I would throw Miami and Pitt a bone here as well, but I think, like you said, we're going to be in for a few upsets.
Yeah, I personally I don't think that it's going to come in Ohio State, Michigan. I know you briefly touched on this game and the importance for Michigan, but I I look at this Michigan team, and so I imagine you have a ton of thoughts in this rivalry as in this game in general as well. But I don't see this going the way it did the last couple of years, right? So the not last year, but the 3 years before that, you could honestly argue Michigan had a better team, right? They had a really good defense, had JJ McCarthy, right? They were playing good, and Ohio State's defense just wasn't it. I mean, they really lacked secondary help. They couldn't tackle. I mean, Cornelius Johnson had two huge plays. I forget what year was it. 2023, the year with Stroud was in the shoe. I think it might have been 2022
Probably this
because
2020.
because McCord was 2023. So yeah, this is 2022. And so they just didn't have the defense, right? Then 2023, you had McCord at Michigan, and you had Marvin Harrison, and yeah, you had a good team, but that offense was clearly lacking with McCord. But here's where here's where it gets tough for me. Last year, they were what 20-point favorites. Ohio State was. I thought there was absolutely no way Michigan, led by Davis Warren, was going to come into the shoe and beat Ohio State. Well, then we saw the game plan. Ryan Day said, "Look, we have these two transfer portal running backs. We're going to out tough Michigan. We're going to stick it to them. We're going to show that we're tougher than they are, and we're going to beat them in the trenches." And they decided to try and run at Mason Graham for 4 quarters, and that didn't work. Now Mason Graham was a top 5 pick, and he's playing really well in the NFL for the Browns. So I think overall it was just a really bad game plan. And then by the time that the end of the game came around, you had no passing attack. It wasn't good enough to come back into the game. So like that sits in the back of my head. But then I also think about this year. Has Bryce Underwood seen a defense like Ohio State? No, he has not. I Michigan has hung around with. Granted, these were road games, but they hung around with teams like Michigan State, like Northwestern. Teams that if they really are this playoff team, right? Michigan is a playoff team, or at least they should be in contention if they beat Ohio State, right? Well, you would think Michigan would handle business and really stick it to Northwestern or Michigan State. So
as
I
well.
think roster wise, yeah, I don't understand the line movement here. I liked where the line opened up at. I think Ohio State should be favored by about 2 touchdowns. Now it's down to, I think I saw Ohio State -10. I heavily disagree with that move. I think I'm not going to come up here and guarantee an Ohio State win because I thought last year was the guaranteed win. They didn't get it, so I'm not going to guarantee that here. And I do think that it might be a little tough for Ohio State if they are down Jeremiah Smith, if they are down Carnell Tate, and with this running game, I think people still have their questions. They looked good against Rutgers last week, but Michigan is a completely different opponent than Rutgers is. So I think there is a path to Michigan winning. I do think there is if they can stop the run, if they could do enough on offense. But that's my question. I think this Ohio State defense is one of the best college defenses we've ever seen. I think they're really well coached. I think they've got players on all levels. I mean, the main question for Ohio State coming into the year was Julian Sayin on offense, the running game, and then on defense it was the D line. Well, Caden Curry has stepped up. He's been great on the D line. I mean, he has made plays every single week. Really, since that was the Illinois game that he really just he had multiple sacks. So really, ever since then, he's been phenomenal. Caleb Downs on this defense. Davis and Igbinosun, he struggled last year, mainly against Oregon, but he's bounced back and he's played great. So I just think that this Ohio State defense is going to shut down everybody. I don't see anybody beating Ohio State in a low-scoring game like they did last year because I think Ohio State's offense is too good. Because I don't know how you feel. I do think Julian Sayin is better than Will Howard was last year. I do think Julian Sayin is just he's a better thrower of the football. I think he's more accurate. I think he's more willing to take those shots downfield. Where I felt like Will Howard, especially in the beginning of the year, was really reliant on Jeremiah Smith. Didn't really unlock Emeka Egbuka until the playoffs. That game against Oregon specifically. So for me personally, I don't see how Ohio State. I'm not going to say beats the brakes off Michigan, but I don't see how Ohio State doesn't win by 2 scores here. I think Ohio State is just that much more talented on defense. I think they match up rather well with Michigan. Yeah, Ohio State might not be able to run the football as well, but like if they're healthy in the pass game, there's no reason that Ohio State shouldn't win this one.
And that actually was going to be my point about why the line could be moving. Carnell Tate did not play last week. He has not played in 2 or 3 games. Jeremiah Smith did not play last week. I think there's a little bit of, I'll say, load management in there a little bit. I didn't think we would ever hear that, but now they're playing in a length season, and honestly longer with all the bye weeks in there with the playoff and the bowl games. I think they just want to get right, get healthy. They knew they could beat Rutgers without those two. Don't risk it and play them. The run game has started to develop over time as we've seen the likes of Bo Jackson and Isaiah West. I'm glad to see the younger backs getting some play here over James Peoples and CJ Donaldson. No shade on those guys, but they weren't getting the job done like we expected them to. So I'm all for the Bo train, the Isaiah West train, and riding with that. I think Max Clare, having the game he did last week, leaves the possibility of a big game for the tight end from Purdue heading into this game against Michigan. We know they're likely going to bracket Jeremiah Smith. They could even get creative and double bracket if Carnell Tate's playing, and that forces Julian Sayin to throw it underneath or throw it to his other weapons. Obviously, Ohio State has a plethora of them, including Quincy Porter, who didn't even play last week either in that receiver room, and he's a very highly touted 5-star receiver. So Ohio State has the skill across every facet. It's really just going to come down to the same thing it's been in the entirety of this rivalry, protecting the quarterback, getting pressure on the opposing team's quarterback, but more importantly, who's going to win the line of scrimmage. And for example, the last 23 games between these two teams, the winner has had more rushing yards. I think that is a little bit flawed because the winning team is going to run the ball more, especially as the game progresses. But just ironically, in the Urban Meyer era, they were very run dominant, run first, pass second teams. They always led on the ground in terms of running the football. And all the games Michigan has won, they've dominated the run as well. So although it's a little bit flawed, I do think it can tell the story for how the game goes and who likely wins the game. Michigan's going to rely on the run. I think we're going to see a lot of Bryce Underwood as well with some QB run games. So Ohio State's going to have to prep for that. But I think for Ohio State, as long as the weather isn't an atrocity and they literally can't throw the football, I think they should just play their game, which they have not done in a few years against Michigan, and they can finesse their way past this Wolverines team who is going to come ready to go. Obviously, the record doesn't mean anything in this game. It never has. I remember the year Brady Hoke had a basically non-bowl eligible Michigan team on the ropes against Ohio State, going for two to try to win the game at the end, and that was a very just catastrophic moment, or would have been for Ohio State. Obviously, Michigan didn't get that 2-point conversion, and Ohio State won the game, but I think it just goes to show the records mean literally nothing in this game. Michigan, way back when Braxton Miller was a freshman, that was the interim head coach Luke Fickell year after Tattoo Gate. Ohio State goes 6-7. They lose to Michigan. They lose their bowl game to Florida, but they went into that game unranked, no need to be ranked at all, frankly, and the worst team of the two. And they took Michigan to the ropes. So the records don't mean anything here. I think that's been proven in the last 4 years and even prior to that as well. But I'm looking forward to how Ohio State responds here. And that would beg the question, if they lose again to Michigan, we're going to hear all the same stuff about Ryan Day that we have already heard in the past. I have fallen victim to, or I should say, been guilty of saying all those things myself, because we don't want another John Cooper era where we win every game or we win most of our games, but we cannot beat Michigan. And back when John Cooper was coaching for Ohio State, it was very much you lose this game and your season's done. It's over with. It was two contending teams at the end in the BCS model. And whoever wins this game, oftentimes they went to the Rose Bowl or they went to the national championship game. So it's changed, obviously, with the playoff and the lack of I shouldn't say lack of importance, but like the game isn't life or death anymore. Obviously, we saw that with Ohio State last year. They lose the game, they run the table through the entire top 10 and decimate teams as they win a national championship game. And for Michigan, they won that game, they turn around and they beat Alabama in a bowl game. And that really, for a lot of people, it felt like that was going to kickstart this Bryce Underwood era. It hasn't gone as planned. In fact, Bryce Underwood's had worse statistics across the board than Davis Warren, but he's a more talented player. I think that's evident, and we'll probably see some of that and flashes of it in this game. I wish it was a night game, but there's obviously reasons from a tailgating aspect and the, we'll say, use of alcohol in the stadium as to why it is not a night game. I totally understand that. I just wish it would be. The atmosphere would be nuts.
I feel like part of that is I would agree the atmosphere would be nuts, especially seeing that Ohio State doesn't get many night games, so seeing that Tennessee game last year at night. But I think part of that is just really just a tradition. I honestly think that's the main aspect of it.
It's 100% the tradition. I do want to take a moment and throw a shot at, and I mean this respectfully, just take a shot at Big Noon Fox for being Big Noon Fox, because the games have to be at noon. All of Ohio State's biggest games are at noon. They get their night games against, a middle of the road like Rutgers team or Maryland team
or Ohio U.
Yeah, or OU and like whatever it is. So, I wish that could be tweaked a little bit. I think maybe the Big Ten's having some regrets going into the deal with Fox and seeing how that part of it has panned out. Hopefully that changes with time. In the past, when Ohio State had games, when ESPN had their deal with the Big Ten and they were doing all the ABC games, it was always at night. And I do think that plays a factor in some of these games. I know from a fan experience, we want to see more night games because that's when you truly see the atmosphere for what it is. Kyle Field, where A&M plays, they get night games against teams like Notre Dame, and you can feel the atmosphere like from the TV. So we don't really get to see that with Ohio State or even Michigan because they don't have those night games. But I would argue those are two of the top 5 to 7 venues for stadium pulse, as we say on the video game, that these teams could offer, but they don't. And they have two of the, I think, 3 biggest stadiums by capacity in the entire country. So, and in fact, not just the country for college football, but like the NFL as well. So that is a noteworthy point there. I do agree with that. Other than that, though, I mean, the only other game I think that we could see an upset in really is the Iron Bowl with Alabama and Auburn. Obviously, I already mentioned Georgia Tech. I think that has upset potential. I think Texas has upset potential. That's the 120th meeting, I believe, between A&M and Texas. So a rivalry that was for a while paused because of the conference alignments is now back. That is a game played at the end of the year. I still wish, we got Oklahoma State. We don't. I think they should maybe work on fixing that. There's a lot of different rivalries that have been paused, but looking at the Iron Bowl specifically, I think this could definitely warrant trap game vibes here for Alabama. We saw it when they played South Carolina. We could see it again here playing Auburn, who's a better team, or has been all year, from a win-loss perspective than South Carolina. And with the recent QB change, they were able to throw the football around. They're able to maybe get aggressive, and I think they will have a lot of regrets blowing that game that they had against Alabama. Jalen Milroe on the fourth and Yucatan gets the touchdown pass. Alabama saves potentially their playoff hopes. So I think Auburn's going to come into this game motivated at home. They are a 6.5 point underdog, which is honestly pretty low considering Auburn's season, but we know how this rivalry plays. I do think they have a chance to pull off an epic upset at another tough venue to play in, Jordan-Hare Stadium.
Yeah, I look at this for Alabama, right? Yeah, I know they played Eastern Illinois last week, 156-0, whatever. But before that, they lost to Oklahoma. So that Oklahoma loss, they've had some time to get over it, but this will really be their first chance to prove themselves since that loss. So, they can either step up to the challenge and bounce back and really kind of take their anger out on Auburn, or they can kind of crumble and they can lose outright here. So I think it's interesting. As for like a pick in this game, Auburn's just been so bad this year. But you mentioned the quarterback change, and I wonder how Alabama's defense would travel here on the road. But Alabama has played in some of these really close road games. They only beat Missouri by 3, beat South Carolina by 7, Georgia by 3. They lost to Florida State. By the way, how does the SEC play like no road games? Like Missouri hasn't played on the road. This is what their 5th road. Like how does the SEC play no road games? I don't understand that. But yeah, I question how Bama will be able to travel here. You mentioned night game at Jordan-Hare. This place is going to be rocking. I very easily could be a trap spot. But at the same time, you saw how Ohio State came out against Tennessee after they lost to Michigan. Now, I'm not saying this Bama team is anywhere near that team that Ohio State was last year, but could certainly see something a little bit similar, right, where they just come out motivated from the gate, firing on all cylinders. Ty Simpson is slinging the football all over the field. Or they're going to be in a dogfight. And honestly, with the way that this rivalry has gone, I probably lean a little more towards the dogfight. I think this game's going to be close.
I agree. I think this game is definitely going to be close, and that, leads me to then question what this game. Obviously, there's a lot riding on this game. Alabama needs this game to have a chance at the college football playoff, but more importantly,
Yeah.
I think they should be above Notre Dame. That's a whole nother conversation because Notre Dame gets Stanford this week. And yes, it is a rivalry. It has always been. It used to be a pretty bumping rivalry, but Stanford sucks at this point, respectfully. So Notre Dame's gonna dog walk them. Maybe not as bad as they just did Syracuse, but Notre Dame is gonna firmly have a chance to be in here. I want to get your thoughts really quick on how you think the ranking should be from because we talked about this from 8 to 14, because I just think personally Alabama should be above Notre Dame. I think BYU should be above Notre Dame and potentially even Alabama, just because of their schedule. They only have the one loss and they should firmly be in it. I guess I just want to get your thoughts on what you think it should look like, because obviously Notre Dame has looked a certain way. However, the resume doesn't match the way that they've looked from an eye test. The eye test is dominant for Notre Dame. However, that resume, not so much.
Yeah, well, the whole resume thing with Notre Dame, it is tough, right? Because their resume isn't all that impressive, but there are 2 losses, but they were by a combined total of 4 points. So they didn't really get like Bama lost by 2 scores to Florida State. And I would think this is completely different here for Notre Dame, and they were so early in the year that I feel like they don't get as much credit for those losses as they should. But in terms of the rankings, yeah, I like Oklahoma at 8. I would put Bama at 9 and BYU at 10, so I would put both of them above Notre Dame. I would keep Notre Dame above Vanderbilt, but then I would flip Miami and Vanderbilt. But then I feel like at that point, then I feel like you got to put Miami over Notre Dame, right? Because the committee has shown that they value the head-to-head. So I probably would drop Notre Dame down to 13, and they'd be on the outside looking in. Because I would have Oklahoma at 8, Bama at 9, BYU at 11, and then Miami at 12. Right? I mean, I'm not all that high on this Miami team, but I do think that their resume is a little bit better than Vanderbilt. I think Vanderbilt, I mean, their ranked wins, while impressive at the time, I mean, they were LSU and Missouri. And Missouri's backup quarterback was in for the majority of that game, and Vanderbilt really rode that game on the back of their defense. Vanderbilt lost to Alabama, and they lost to Texas as well. So clearly, Vanderbilt is getting propped up for those LSU wins at the time, even though I thought LSU shouldn't have been ranked at that point. But yeah, I mean, like, look, Notre Dame is probably the toughest team to rank on this list because I'm personally not that high on CJ Carr, but Notre Dame's defense has played better as of late. A lot of things are possible with this run game, but my thing has been if Notre Dame goes down to a team like, say, Oklahoma or a team like Texas Tech, I don't think they can come back. I don't think they have the passing attack to get back in a game like that. So that's really my concern for a playoff matchup. But I mean, in terms of the rankings, yeah, I would probably have Notre Dame just on the outside looking in behind Miami. Miami.
I agree. I think Vanderbilt probably should be right neck and neck with Miami. I think, though, because Miami beat a team like Notre Dame, that should automatically, with honestly Miami having a better resume and the head to head, despite not playing as well from a style points perspective, I just think they should be above Notre Dame. That's not meant to be shade at Notre Dame. It might be shade at their fan base because if you ever get on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, and you see the conversation between Notre Dame fans, Miami fans, even Texas Tech fans, it's very much, oh, Notre Dame's no one in the country is better than Notre Dame outside of Ohio State. First off, I disagree with that. I think Indiana's better. I
Heavily.
think better. I would argue Texas Tech and Georgia are also both better. If you want to talk about Notre Dame being better than Oregon, fine. If you want to talk about them being better than Ole Miss, probably going to lean Ole Miss, but fine. I think Oklahoma, because of their style of play, would beat Notre Dame, especially if it was in Norman, just because of how good and how dominant their defense has been. I think that would be a very fascinating game that we might actually get if the rankings hold true right now. I think solely off resume, Alabama should be above Notre Dame. And you really can't dispute it. They played 4 straight ranked games, then played at South Carolina, a tough place to play, played again an Oklahoma team who, fun fact, Alabama's never beaten Oklahoma in the regular season, and that held true this year. And then you play this rivalry game. So, like, their schedule hasn't been easy at all. It's probably been the toughest one in the entire country, and they're getting
Mm-hmm.
penalized for the one loss at the beginning of the year when, fun fact, last year, and honestly, actually 2 years in a row, did Notre Dame not lose to middling G5 teams? Marshall, and that Marshall team ended up, I think, winning 9 or 10 games. Like, cool, but they weren't in the playoff. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't anything like. And Northern Illinois, who I think ended up missing a
Yeah.
bowl game, or they won 7, I think. So Notre Dame
Yeah.
did get penalized and lost those games. Then the worst teams in Florida State. So I beg the question: why is Alabama getting penalized for losing same said type of game to Florida State? Yes, the defense was very bad. We saw a lot of the things from a weakness perspective Alabama had on their team. Some of it has been cleaned up. Some of it is not. Like they are very susceptible to the run. If they play a team like Notre Dame or a Michigan or even a team with a little bit more balance, like a Georgia, and we already saw them beat Georgia, but how are they going to defend the run? That's really the big thing for Alabama. They struggled with it against Oklahoma, too, because of what John Mateer offers in the run game from the QB position. So I just think Alabama's unfairly getting penalized for the same things that Notre Dame has done the 2 years prior, and they weren't penalized at all. But it's because of, and I hate to say this, it is the Notre Dame brand. They're not going to leave Notre Dame out because of their brand and what they offer to the playoff. It's the same thing. It's the same reason for if Texas beats A&M, they're probably in the playoff. I hate to say that, but they honestly might get in. I don't think it's mathematically that possible because we're going to have two teams, not just one, that are going to jump in because they're not ranked in the top 12, the ACC and the American champion. Although I do offer a potential another scenario to that we'll talk about here in 1 second. I just think Notre Dame should be that team on the outside looking in. And realistically, if you are ranked 10th, your eyes should be, your eyes and your ears, all your senses should be heightened because that's where Alabama is. They're basically what I would say 10 is basically the last team in, at least for this year. That's what 10 is. If you're 11 or 12, you're pretty much kicked out unless you win your conference. BYU has a chance to do that here, but then the question becomes where does Texas Tech fall? If BYU gets in, okay, cool. You would have to presume they go above Notre Dame. You would have to think they go above Alabama and potentially even Oklahoma. So then that means where does Texas Tech fall? Where do they fall below or above Oklahoma? Are they above or below Alabama, Notre Dame? I think Texas Tech should be above Oklahoma in that instance if that were to happen. But that means the new, teams on the outside looking in are still Alabama, Notre Dame, and then that last spot would go to likely the ACC winner. So a lot of fascinating things that can happen, but I just think I disagree here. I don't really see what the committee sees the eye test with Notre Dame. They see the style points, the dominance from the 1-to-1. However, their job is supposed to be putting all the pieces together, not just looking at eye test, not just looking at head to head, not just looking at strength of record or victory or resume or schedule or whatever. All of it. And I think all of it together factored in, Notre Dame should be the team on the outside looking in, not Alabama, not BYU for sure, and not Oklahoma or Ole Miss or any team like that. I would even argue Utah should probably warrant a lot more discussion here. Obviously, the committee is very high on Utah because they got smacked by BYU, and they're right behind them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then for BYU, they got decimated by a Texas Tech team the committee actually really likes, and we do too, but they don't seem to like BYU as much because of their placement in the rankings. So I just think there's a few tweaks that should be made. Hopefully they happen this week or next. But outside of that, I want to talk about my crazy scenario. So you don't believe in this scenario, and it probably won't happen, but let's say James Madison runs the table here. Let's say they're in the rankings later tonight. Let's say they're in the rankings. Let's say they have Tulane and or North Texas ranked. It could be one. It could be either. It doesn't matter. I think the winner of that AAC game, so North Texas Tulane, more than likely that's what it'll be. The winner of that game is in automatically. They're going to likely be ranked too. Tulane's already ranked as we speak. But I would be fascinated to see if James Madison wins. They're a one-loss team, despite it being in the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt's had better years than this year for sure, but I still think comparatively, it's one of the better mid-majors. I would argue. Let's say they win, they completely win out. They win the conference, everything. Tulane, I'll say North Texas because I'm a big North Texas guy, so I want to see North Texas win here and get in. And they would like geographically be playing close to home because they're going to be playing a Texas Tech or an Oklahoma or someone like that in the first round anyway, so they don't even have to travel far for that game. But let's then say Miami beats Pitt here. So that would pretty much remove any sort of chance of Pitt getting into the ACC championship game. That leaves you with SMU and a ranked Virginia team. SMU already with 3 losses. We've already said we don't think a 3-loss team should be in the playoff. But if SMU wins their conference, James Madison wins their conference, North Texas wins their conference, do they leave out the ACC for 2 G5s? And scenario number 2, let's say Pitt loses and SMU loses because they're traveling to Cal. There's still a chance SMU is in the ACC championship game at that point with 4 losses. Would a 4-loss champion being in the ACC get in over two G5s. I just think we should have a little bit bigger conversation of two G5s getting in because I do think it's very possible.
Well, first of all, let's start here. I think if James Madison is going to get ranked, this has to be the week because I'm looking at Illinois, Missouri, Houston, all three teams that were ranked. Now, granted, they were a little towards the bottom, but those teams are going to have to, I would assume, drop out of there. I mean, Illinois has 4 losses. They should not be ranked. Missouri now has 4 losses. They should not be ranked. Houston, I mean, tough loss, whatnot. But so those are 3 teams that are going to have to get replaced in the rankings. I
And
presume North Texas would be one of those teams.
I was just going to say all three of those teams lost to below like caliber teams. Missouri, that
Yeah.
different, but Illinois lost to a pretty bad Wisconsin team. Houston, they lost to a pretty bad so far this year West Virginia team. So like those two teams for sure got to be out. Missouri, different conversation. Don't even think they should be ranked to begin with. But yes, I agree with you.
So James Madison would have to be ranked this week, but I mean, if they haven't been ranked at this point, I feel like the committee is telling you that they don't really value the Sun Belt. They don't think the Sun Belt is just up to par with even the American, and I can't blame them. I would have to agree with them. So I have a hard time. I know a lot of people want to see James Madison get in, but I'm gonna lie. I mean, they're gonna get blown out. Like I have a hard time seeing the committee putting them in because I think the committee did see the blowouts last year, and I mean I know there was really nothing they could do about it because like SMU was in the ACC championship. They certainly deserved, to be in. Boise State won their conference. They deserved to be in. But I think you saw some of those blowouts. I just look. James Madison's a fun story. They're a fun school to root for. But I think the committee not ranking them to this point shows you how they value the Sun Belt, because like going into last week, 3 loss Arizona State. Would you have put James Madison over Arizona State in the rankings at 25?
James Madison, probably not. I'd have to like dig deeper, but like Tulane and North Texas, yes, 100% I would. So,
Yeah.
they're a little bit more comparable, I guess, than what we're talking about, which is getting into the playoff. But it's kind of the same thing. Like Arizona State's been up and down. They got ranked with Jeff Sims playing as well. Levitt wasn't even in there; he's been hurt. So begs the
Mm-hmm.
question. But Arizona State's had a honestly somewhat tough Big 12 schedule, so I would probably lean Arizona State. It kind of surprised me when I saw them in the rankings, but it kind of made sense like when it happened real time. So
Yeah, and they're a team that blew out Colorado last week, so they're going to move up in those rankings. But I mean I wouldn't put James Madison over them. So I will be interested to see where they put James Madison in these rankings. But for your scenario, I do think it's interesting because at that point the committee has to make a decision. Do they value the conference champion of a Power Four conference that much, or a team that would technically be most deserving because they're 11-1? And I just think for James Madison, I mean, if they maybe would have beaten Louisville in the beginning of the year, they would have an argument. But the fact that they lost by multiple scores, I have no idea what the spread was for that game. I mean, I know they lost by 14, which I guess is impressive for a Sun Belt team. I just I don't see how the committee could justify putting James Madison there. I feel like that would just kind of be like it would just be very Mickey Mouse to just throw James Madison in for the sake of having it would be a pity invite to the playoff in my opinion.
I jokingly said they don't have the Signetti PR team because they would be ranked. They probably that whole thing.
Yeah.
But I do think it does warrant the whole most deserving or best conversation. Um, James Madison did cover the spread in that game because it was 14.5 and they lost by 14. So technically they covered it. They didn't
There you
play
go.
they didn't play poorly against Louisville. They just didn't get anything going on
No.
offense. I thought the defense played relatively fine. They held Louisville to 28, but offense couldn't get going early and they had to play catch up. So for the ACC, because I'm looking at it, I don't have all the scenarios memorized, but there are 3 6-1 teams up there. Obviously, we've talked about them: Virginia, Pitt, and SMU. Let's all assume Virginia wins this week. They're playing Virginia Tech. We're gonna assume they win though. That leaves the conversation for Pitt playing Miami and SMU traveling to Cal to play a very sneaky 6-5 Cal team. They have a couple good wins as well. They did beat Louisville earlier this year, so Cal's a team to kind of monitor there. They've already got bowl eligibility with a nice freshman quarterback. They could make things tricky against SMU, but after that, you have a 6-2 team in Georgia Tech, and then you have 2 5-2 teams in Miami and Duke. Now I don't know all of the scenarios, but obviously the Pitt Miami winner hypothetically has a chance. For Miami, they lost to SMU, so more than likely, let's say they beat Pitt. Pitt drops. They have head-to-head on Pitt, but they don't have head-to-head on SMU. So if SMU loses, it wouldn't matter. They would have head-to-head, or they would get in there before Miami does. For Georgia Tech, though, they're 6-2. We'd have to look at the scenarios there. Obviously, they don't have head-to-head on Pitt, but then they won't even have the better record than a team like Virginia. So the scenarios are all really tricky, to be honest with you. That's kind of the disadvantage of this expansion. And you're going to have a lot of teams that didn't even play each other. You can't look at head-to-head. Like, if Michigan beats Ohio State, and then whatever happened, the scenario was Oregon beats USC because Michigan needs that. Michigan then beats Ohio State this week. And then let's say Oregon loses to Washington. Who gets in, Ohio State, Michigan, or Oregon in the Big Ten championship game against Indiana? Like that is a very real thing. So I think trying to figure it out is sometimes tricky, and that's what it is here for the ACC, because there would be a potential scenario maybe where a 6-5 Duke team is playing in the ACC championship game against Virginia, and if respectfully Duke wins the ACC at like 8-5, they don't get in over James Madison. That's kind of the point of asking the question is like, would you take a 4 or 5 loss ACC team over a 1 loss who's been pretty dominant mid-major team who's also more deserving and at that point probably the better team if they haven't lost 5 games? So that's kind of the point of the question, is to get the mind going, because I guess that possibility is there where a Duke could get in, or even Georgia Tech could rebound and get in to that championship game. SMU having the 3 losses, Pitt having the 3 losses. Pitt will likely be ranked this week, but if they lose this week and then SMU's unranked and SMU isn't ranked, I think that could be very telling. If SMU gets ranked this week, which I think the committee will rank them for this exact scenario I'm giving, they won't have to debate James Madison or SMU. They'll just bank on the winner of the Virginia SMU game being ranked, winning this week, and then also being in the playoff. But if SMU isn't ranked, they run the table and win, and then there's also an unranked 1-loss team. I think it begs the question. So I do think if it's a team like a Duke who gets in there somehow, then we can have another conversation. Because if it's like a 5-loss Duke team winning the ACC, one, it begs the question of the strength of the conference. Although I think the top half of the ACC is better than it's advertised to be honest with you. Like, I think the first 6 teams are pretty good. Wake Forest, obviously, I'm a little lower on them than you are, despite them being 8-3. They've played a pretty easy ACC schedule. And then you have Clemson, Louisville, Cal, NC State. I mean, over half the conference is bowl eligible. NC State's had a down year. Louisville's had a down year. Clemson's had a down year, but they're all bowl eligible. Cal has surprisingly won 6 games. If they beat SMU, that's 7 games. I didn't envision Cal winning that many games this year. So I think their conference is a little bit better than advertised, but say a 5-loss team wins their conference, I would rather just give it to James Madison at that point. So that's kind of the point of the question. But if it is SMU, they probably squeak in and get in over James Madison because they do have the ranked win against Miami, which to this point continues to look pretty good for them if they get in. And I think it's ironic they would be rewarded for that, but Miami would get, punished for what reasons, I don't know, for those losses to those same set teams. It's kind of backwards. But yeah, the 2 losses are SMU or Baylor, TCU, and then they do have a 13-12 loss against Wake Forest. That's their only ACC loss. So they've played Syracuse, Stanford, Boston College, 3 teams Notre Dame also played. So 3 of the bottom 5 ACC teams. The ranked win against Miami. They beat Louisville despite them being unranked at the time. They handled business by 32 against them. And then the other wins are non-conference games against Missouri State and East Texas A&M. So very similar resume to Notre Dame, but they're unranked. So that's kind of the whole point of the Notre Dame thing too. But I think it's very possible James Madison gets in, especially if it's not Virginia winning the ACC or Pitt.
Yeah, I mean, well, and when I mentioned these teams at the bottom here that um, are going to drop from the rankings, Pitt's going to be right back in those rankings for beating Georgia Tech. So, I think Pitt's going to be an interesting team here. But I think my final point that I'll make here is so for James Madison, I think that I first of all I think the committee has shown you that they don't necessarily go with most deserving. I think they do go with the best team. Obviously you have to be deserving, of course, but like I mean, would you take James Madison to beat a team like SMU? Would you take them to beat a team, like Pitt or Virginia? I just I don't necessarily think that I would, so therefore I think that the committee would automatically kind of give a little bit more bias to those teams in the in the Power Four, just because you play better competition. There's a stronger chance that you just simply are better.
I'll then counter. Would you say Tulane or North Texas beats a team like SMU or Pitt or Virginia? I don't personally think any of those teams beat Pitt. I just really like Pitt's team. I like what they have to offer offensively,
Mm-hmm.
and they're mostly coached for the most part like pretty well by Pat Narduzzi. Um, I do think Virginia or SMU would be a little bit more susceptible. I know Virginia's had the crazy year. However, they had the easiest schedule in the ACC, I would argue, and they didn't really have to prove themselves all year. They just got ranked by winning all their games and no one thinking they would be at this point, and they're at this point now. So I think Virginia's ranked for that reason. I think they're susceptible to potentially losing to one of those teams, but I would beg the same question for a Tulane or North Texas. Would one of those two teams beat said ACC teams we're talking about? It wouldn't matter because the American champion is going to get in anyway. But they will have to rank
Mm-hmm.
those teams. They'll have to put 111 and 112. So I guess comparatively, what do you think it would be? I think if it's Virginia or Pitt, they're probably 11. If it's SMU, I think there's a chance they're ranked 12 though, and they put in North Texas or Tulane 11.
Well, first of all, I would have North Texas ranked over Tulane right now. So personally, I'm a little bit higher on Notre Dame than I am Tulane. But honestly, I do think North Texas could beat a team like SMU. I think North Texas could absolutely beat Virginia. I think I think they could outscore Virginia easily. I know that the big question would be the North Texas defense there, but I mean, it really is just kind of hard because like these teams don't play each other until now, especially teams in the American. Like I know they're considered a group of five, but like they are a step up from the Sun Belt, MAC, Conference USA. Some of those smaller conferences. I know that the American is kind of looked at as just a step down from those Power Four. Um, so yeah, I think it is absolutely a possibility, but I just have a hard time putting James Madison over a team from the American. So I probably would have the ACC champion at 11, and then North Texas or Tulane at 12. That would be how I would do it, especially if it is a team like SMU or Miami or even Pitt.
Very fun uh, debating scenarios, I would say, for the back half of the playoff, because that's really where we're going to see, those surprise teams make those upsets. 8-9 isn't really, it's Oklahoma or Notre Dame. It's not really going to be that catastrophic. If it is Alabama and 7 being like Ole Miss or Oregon, you obviously, I think Alabama would probably, despite being the lower seed, probably be the betting favorite against one of those teams. So I don't really think those are upsets. It's really where 11 and 12 is. It's going to dictate a lot of this, and we almost saw it last year. Obviously, with the Arizona State Texas game, that game was nuts. Arizona State definitely stamped themselves as deserving of being in the playoff. SMU, on the other hand, could not say
For
the
sure.
same thing. They got a tough draw by Penn State, so I think it'll be interesting to see. But with that, we're not going to conclude. We're going to just transition into the NBA. We're going to talk about the Eastern Conference here real quick. A lot going on. Some new faces, some familiar faces at the top of the conference. But the top two teams in particular, the Detroit Pistons and Toronto Raptors, have gotten off to phenomenal starts, and they're right there with Cleveland, and also a surprising start from Miami, who just gets Tyler Hero back here. They're 12-6. They've played some very good basketball as well.
Yeah, the East is kind of like a complete shakeup. I mean, when you look at the West, it's kind of the same teams. The Thunder, Nuggets, Lakers. The Rockets are kind of the new team, but you got the Warriors, Timberwolves in there, so it's a lot of the same teams. And then the same teams finishing at the bottom. The Pelicans, the Jazz. But for the East, I mean, the top three teams: Pistons, Raptors, and Heat. Uh, I mean, the Heat were a play-in team last year. The Raptors weren't close to the playoffs. The Pistons made the playoffs, but they got bounced in the first round. So I mean, that's honestly kind of shocking. And I shouldn't really say shocking because we knew the Pistons would be better this year. I'd say the Heat are a little surprising. We knew the Raptors would be a little bit better this year, but to see them at 13-5 on an 8-game win streak, I think is certainly impressive. Now they did beat the Cavs backups last night, so you could take that as you will. But yeah, I think this is great to see some different teams up the top here. I mean, this kind of goes into what we talked about with parity in the NBA. But I think the question does become, can you take these teams seriously come playoff time? I think the Pistons, you might be able to because they have that playoff experience under their belt. I still have my doubts about a JB Bickerstaff led team in the playoffs. The Raptors, I mean, they're really young, but they're a pretty complete team. And then the Heat, we got some veteran guys. They can put up some points. The Heat would be an interesting matchup for anybody. So, even in the play-in, right? The Hawks are currently at 6, so they're currently not in the play-in, and they've been a perennial play-in team. I think the 76ers could be an interesting team. I mean, the Celtics at 10, we knew they'd be a step down without Jason Tatum, but I think nobody expected them to essentially be on the cusp of missing the playoffs. So I think that says a lot about Jason Tatum, but I think this is going to be fun to follow this throughout the season, kind of see where the Pistons go. I mean, the Pistons are 15-2. We talked last week about can the Thunder win 70 games because they're 17-1. I mean, we feel like they're not even playing to their full potential yet. And we want to start talking about the Pistons. How many games can they win? I mean, right now, they feel like they're easily on pace to clear 60 wins.
And they have a most improved player candidate in Jalen Duren, now averaging over 20 points and 12 rebounds. Did not envision that happening. He was more of a 10-10 guy the last few years. He has nearly doubled his points per game from a year ago. He's been phenomenal for the Pistons. Cade Cunningham continues to do what he does, and that's be a consistent mainstay player for the Pistons. Obviously, they're a franchise player, but we know what his production is going to look like. At times he's inefficient. At times he struggles with the turnovers. But he handles a lot of this offense and a lot of this offensive load. So you're going to live with that when you get 38 and 9 from Cade on any given night. So I think those are fascinating. You had brought up a good point, and I agree with it, is the Sixers and how they've looked so far in the season with only 6 games from Joel Embiid, 3 now from Paul George, who you made it sound like he got hurt again. So ironic. But the Sixers, they've really tapped into their guard play, their youth movement, and Tyrese Maxey, and they're on the cups of being in the playoffs now because of their change in philosophy, moving on from Embiid and George and relying more on Maxey and these high-level, high-scoring guards.
Yeah, I think they still want to get Embiid involved, right? I don't think they want to fully move on from Embiid yet. I think they want to play Embiid with a lot of this young talent. I'm sure they want to get Paul George back too, but I think they're really more focused on Embiid. And look, if this team can survive the play-in, if they can really flip with the Hawks, if they can get into that 6th seed, things could be an interesting team because they, while young, Embiid has some playoff experience, but not a ton. So they'll largely be inexperienced, but it's a team that can put up some points, man. I mean, you mentioned Tyrese Maxey. He's going to be in MVP discussions, 33 points per game. You add in VJ Edgecombe, and then if Jared McCain gets healthy, we remember how he was hooping before the injury last year. So, I mean, he's got tons of potential. This team could be a lot better than really what their record is. Honestly, I think their record is impressive for kind of the lineup turnover and lineup change that they've had to deal with because guys have been in and out of the lineup. They've been in and out of minutes restrictions. You're relying on some younger rookies. Jared McCain just came back. So I think the Sixers could be one of the more interesting teams to follow here. If they get into the play-in, even if they miss the play-in, if they get into that 6th seed, you kind of get that extra advantage, a little bit extra rest, that extra security of being in. Um, I think they could absolutely make some noise. But I think the Magic, I think we were talking a little bit earlier. I think this is an interesting team. They made that huge move for Desmond Bane, and we thought that move would really put them over the top. And the Magic were pretty highly touted coming into the year. Now sitting at the 8 seed. Again, we're only 18 games into the season, but they're 10-8, 7-3 in their last 10. So they've been playing some pretty good basketball as of late. But we feel like this Magic team, their ceiling is not as high as what some people may think. I'd like to get your thoughts on Desmond Bain because they made this move. They gave up a ton of draft capital to go and get him, but not sure if it's the best fit.
I definitely thought the fit would be better. Thankfully for the Magic and their fans, Jalen Suggs has been healthy. He has, again, built off of last season, pretty much statistically the same, and he is an All NBA defender. So having Suggs as well in there and healthy is huge for the Magic. However, they have not had good health from Paolo for 3 years now. He's again hurt. And Franz Wagner, despite being very good, I don't really know how well he is from his ability to step into that like lead scoring role, and that goes for Desmond Bain as well. We saw him do it a lot in Memphis, but it's a different type of team. So I think for the Magic, you mentioned they were playing really fast to start the year. They saw it wasn't working. They got back to playing how they did last year, having a slower pace, keeping the points per game down, but knowing their strength of their team is defense. Bain helps their defense, but that comes with the caveat of having Paolo in the lineup. They don't have him in the lineup, so they're going to struggle so far. And I thought they'd be a top four team in the East. They have not looked like it so far. They're battling for the play-in right now, but it's still early. Things could change. I think Orlando's starting five, particularly their starting four, between Suggs, Bain, Paolo, and Franz, is one of the better ones in the league. But despite that, and despite the depth that they have, because they have very good depth, they are still struggling. So I think that might raise some questions about Paolo's ability to be a number one. It could raise questions about Franz's fit next to Paolo, two guys who aren't the best 3-point shooters. They operate better inside the arc, but Bain's kind of supposed to be that floor spacer, and he's done it at times. But I think when they got Bain and they traded all that they did for him, I think they were expecting closer to 25 points per game than 15 points per game. And right now he's averaging 17. He's closer to 15. I definitely envisioned him being at least a 22, 23 point per game scorer with the 5 rebounds and 5 assists, but his numbers are down in that aspect. So we know what Franz is going to do. He's going to be steady. He's going to score 23 to 25 a night. And we know Paolo is capable of the same thing. But I think the fit next to those other two guys is the question mark that needs to be raised here. And I gave you the example of Toronto. Brandon Ingram can score within the offense. They traded for him last year. They sat him out the rest of the year. But he can fit within almost any offense in the league because he doesn't need the ball always to score. He can score off of actions. He can score off of screens, other various things. He's always been a very good scoring within the offense type of player. And he only needs a couple dribbles and he can score. It's not like a DeMar DeRozan where he needs to isolate, he needs to have the ball on the block or on the elbow, and he needs to go to work, and he needs the ball for 3 to 5 seconds. Brandon Ingram can do all that stuff, but he doesn't need the same amount of time to do it. And then you add in RJ Barrett, you add in Scotty Barnes. Those are 3 guys who are all capable of 20 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists a night, and really any of them can go off on any given night. Ingram just had 37 yesterday. They have Emmanuel Quickly. He's a good facilitating guard, but I think the Magic are similar to Toronto, but ironically, I think Toronto has better big man play between Pirtle and whatever else they have depth-wise in comparison to Orlando. I've never been high on Wendell Carter. They kind of just rely on him. They paid him a ton of money. I think they could have moved off of him. I would have loved for them last offseason to maybe trade Carter and basically redo a trade from way back in the day when Vucevic got traded from Orlando to Chicago for Wendell Carter. If they flipped it right back and sent Carter to Chicago for Vucevic, I think he would be a better fit around this Orlando team. He doesn't fit their defensive identity. However, he takes a lot off of the load of those guys offensively, and he would be a really good, not only back to basket center, he can space the floor. And I think they try to do that with Wendell Carter, and it doesn't work. Vucevic offers a little bit more consistency on the boards as well as from beyond the arc, and he's an underrated playmaker. So I think that's the problem for Orlando. They don't have enough playmaking. They thought Bain would offer some of that outside of Jalen Suggs, and he hasn't done it as well as I thought. So I think Orlando's still a team to watch. They're not out of it, of course. We're only 18 to 20 games in, but I just think Orlando may need to question their core a little bit. Is Paolo worth being the number 1 on our team? Is Franz worth being the number 2 on our team? Should they be a 2 and a 3? so on and so forth. We had those questions about Cade Cunningham for a very long period of time. He's proven it to this point now, so no one questions it anymore. I have those questions about John Morant because I don't think a team can sustain winning with him as their number one player. That he's better as a number two. De'Aaron Fox, he's better as a number two. I don't think the Kings would have ever been able to sustain winning with him as their number one player or as their number one lead scoring guard, whatever you want to call it. So Orlando's probably in a little bit of an identity crisis for those reasons, but I do think it could be something they resolve. I would love to see them, I wanted them to get ballsy and go all in, trade for one of Brown or Tatum a few years ago, and then give that guy the keys to the franchise. Let them be the lead player. We've seen Jaylen Brown capable of doing it, and we've seen Jason Tatum capable of doing it. So maybe flipping a Franz or a Paolo for Jaylen Brown at some point, although it won't happen, I think it would make sense for both teams from a fit perspective. And also, if you're the Celtics, you'd get more depth while Jason Tatum is out. And if you're a guy like Jaylen Brown, you can have the keys to a team. And I think that's something both teams could look at. I don't think it'll happen for Boston, but easy fix for both teams. But I think Orlando's not out of it. They definitely have been one of the more disappointing teams this year, though.
Yeah, and say the playoffs kind of go the way they are now, and honestly, I mean, we can all agree the Hornets, Nets, Pacers, Wizards, they're not making the playoffs. So the Bucks really be the only other team challenging the Celtics for that 10th play-in spot. But a play-in of the Celtics, Bulls, Magic, and Sixers, I think, would draw pretty good ratings because, like, the Celtics, they might have Tatum at that point. Who knows? But even if they don't, still the Celtics, they'd be taking on the 76ers. So, you've got the reigning champs from 2 years ago, and then the Sixers' young core, potentially a healthy Embiid. And then you have the Magic and Bulls. I mean, two teams that are kind of, I don't say under the radar, but the Bulls are a perennial play-in team, and the Magic have some pretty big names. So I think that could be interesting. But as for the Magic, I feel like they're just kind of handicapped right now in terms of making a trade. I feel like they're kind of neck deep in the water that they're in, and they kind of have to stay there. They made that trade for Bane, and I feel like that kind of handicapped them uh, for a little bit now. So, they made the move. I feel like they kind of have to stick with it. And who knows? Maybe they could turn things around. Maybe they find a little bit of a middle of how they played in the beginning of the year, kind of that fast paced, let's score as much as we can, track meet kind of style. Uh, Maybe they can find a middle between that and the kind of the style they're playing now, the slow, grind it down, defensive battle kind of game. Because they're built for those kind of defensive battles. But we've seen times having into the playoffs, those defensive battles do not win you games. You've got to be able to score points and be able to outscore your opponent to have success in the playoffs. And I think that is where the Magic's issues could lie.
It's definitely not the dead ball era of 2000 anymore, where you can win playoff games 67 to 63 like the Pistons used to. You need a little bit more offensive firepower. We saw that with Indiana last year in the run that they were able to take, not only through the playoffs, but really after January. They were pretty much the second or third best team in the league by record, and they proved that in the playoffs. So
Yeah.
I agree with everything wholeheartedly. Continue to recap the NBA and see how their season continues, not only for Orlando, but the entire league. Obviously, I think there's some very sneaky teams. I think there's a lot of teams flying under the radar, and we're going to get a lot of new faces potentially across the awards, a lot of new players that have stepped up for various teams. So with that, that'll conclude our somewhat lengthy episode number 14, second one of the day. I'm Trayvon Hastings. With me, Joey Korzanowski. Thank you to everybody who has listened or watched this on whatever various platform they are on. Speaking of the various platforms, like, subscribe, follow, share, comment, do whatever it is you do on that various platform. We appreciate the love and support. Have a great Thanksgiving and have a lot of fun with your loved ones. It's a big week across sports as well, so eat some food, dominate the turkey, and hopefully your teams win as well this week. But outside of that, that'll be all. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Thank you for tuning in.